We've got an action-packed panel today. Some of the most, I think, respected people in the industry in terms of who either work in hotel bars, write about hotel bars, are helping shape the future of the hotel bar, or in the case of Simon and I, we just like, well, we stay on a lot of couches and in a lot of backpackers, and so to remind us of the T&E budgets that we used to have, we go to a lot of hotel bars to think back to the glory days of travel. All right, so the hotel bar, very, very simply, is an important institution. In fact, we might go so far as to say it's perhaps the most important institution in taking a mostly American invention, we can quibble about that, but mostly an invention at least popularized in America and taking it all over the world. And that was really a role that the hotel bar played. Very quickly, I want to say thank you to our sponsors, to Bacardi Rum, who probably owe more of their sort of success over the last 100 years to the hotel bar than perhaps any other brand. And we'll get into that in a little bit later when we talk about travel and the rise of the tropical hotel bars of the 1920s and 30s. And also to Ford's Gin for loaning us Simon Ford, who's perhaps the most in-demand man at Tales of the Cocktail. So we have, I think they agreed as part of their sponsorship to give us between 70 and 75 minutes of Simon's time, which we'll get to in a second. If Simon runs out, as he often, then that's actually just a performance piece. That's what he does in a hotel bar generally, running out just before the time has come to be settled.
And that's where, yeah, exactly, I'm leaving the check to Jacob.
Yeah. Very, very quickly, again, if you haven't had a chance to, please connect on the Wi-Fi which is provided. Thank you so much to Red Bull for providing that. The network is Tales of the Cocktail and the password is Give You Wings. Please do follow along on the all of the various Tales of the Cocktail channels. And as we said at the outset, please do take the time to download the app. And if you enjoy the seminar, please rate it so that they'll invite us back. And if you don't, then it's also the place for constructive criticism. If there were things that you thought we could improve on in the talk. So rather than just posting about it on Facebook and telling us how much we sucked, which is also, I guess, an outlet. That's how we can determine between Generation X and Generation Y here at Tales. All right, I've got an amazing panel. Some of the, I guess, perhaps highest profile figures in the industry, both within hotel bars and within the broader drinks business. First, I'd like to introduce perhaps the best looking man on this panel, Mr. Erik Lorincz, who is, if you've ever heard of, many hotel bars are famous, but I don't think any hotel bar on earth, or perhaps any bar, is as famous as the American bar. And Erik has been the head bartender of the American bar since its renovation in 2010. And is an award-winning bartender and mixologist in his own right, and just a truly, I guess a great sort of representative of the amazing hotel bar tradition. Erik, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say I'm not making blue drinks. That was a cocktail I made for Jacob only when he came and showed up, right? We don't do that at the Seoul.
When I go home at night, I actually play that image. It's like, remember that one time they let me have a blue drink at the Seoul?
And Jacob spent 4 days looking for that image online.
Right, so for me, the hotel bar was really, before I started bartending and started working in a cocktail bar, in a restaurant, in a nightclub, where I was basically doing marathons. And then I was looking at the hotel bar as something never experienced. And then when I stepped into the first one, and I thought, okay, this is more than just a bar. This is probably, for me, the university where a bartender doesn't just learn about the craft, about the techniques, but more was you learn about personality. You shape your personality because sometimes you deal with people you never thought about you will deal with. And many times in a hotel you find I was finding many of my heroes from TVs, and suddenly they are standing in front of me, and I was like, all right, so now it's the game on, and now I have to deal with this person because I was shaking, and all of a sudden...
I do have a question on that, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah, sure.
If your hero comes in, and orders a really shitty cocktail. Does that mean
good one. I'll just give him his favorite one.
It's like Philip Duff always likes to joke that, you know, Robert De Niro is an amazing actor and kind of changed the way of cinema, but also takes his martinis with vodka. And it sort of trails off. It's like, you know, which actually makes me like him more. But
well, then you have Mr. Bond who takes his martini always shaken.
It's true.
Yeah.
All right, so on to next to another great young kind of talent who I guess has had the opportunity to work at so many great bars, which has chosen a life in hotel bars. And this Mr. Chris Lowder, currently in Seoul, the very much talked about Charles H. Bar. But before that, you've been at the Nomad. Maybe give us a little bit of your background and why you love hotel bars.
Sure. 안녕하세요. It's a Korean joke.
Know your audience.
There you go, there you go. Crickets. Very nice to meet you all. Thank you very much for having me today. So yeah, my name is Chris Lowder. I came up bartending through New York, through a couple different bars, and kind of fell into hotel bars and hotel bartending almost by accident. I got hired at the Nomad Hotel, but I was so focused on the bar program that I didn't stop to realize that it was a hotel until kind of later on, and then fell in love, just absolutely fell in love with the process of working in hotel bars. Hotels really give you the opportunity to make magical moments for people, and it lets you take a long-term focus in your business and in your planning, and in so doing, you can just be absolutely so prepared to make an incredible moment. And so for me, honestly, it's kind of planning events. You can have weddings, you can have amazing banquets, you can have one person there for one night, you can have your hero across the bar from you, and kind of no matter which direction your night goes, you have the resources to make that happen for people. So I love it, and I don't see myself ever stopping.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so Josh Wagner, you've been probably in the hotel bar game longer than any of us. Your favorite hotel bar you put up here, GoldenEye, which I think is just you showing off.
It's just, yeah, it's just flossing.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a life you've chosen. What is it for you that attracts you to the hotel bar world?
Good afternoon, or good morning. It's all I've ever known. My first job ever was at the Shore Club in Miami in 2002 as a, thank you, as an intern for a gentleman named Ben Pundle, who was Ian Traeger's right-hand man, who was created the Met Bar in London. So the hotel bar is the only thing I've ever known in my life. But what I was also always told from the get-go was great tourists follow great locals. So our programming was always about the locals first. And for us, that was, and still to this day, I work at the Miami Beach Edition, which is a new brand between Ian Traeger and Marriott, which we're coming to a lot of cities very, very soon. But for us, it was always, you know, as this fine gentleman was saying before, in terms of his stars, you don't have the luxury to kick people out that a freestanding bar does. Every person who walks in your door is a hotel guest or a potential one, and you have to think about the brand in a long-term perspective. So for me, I sit next to 4, 5, one standing, distinguished gentlemen, where we have the privilege in this room. When we travel, we get to call the us of a different city because we are informed. So for me, it's always been great tourists follow great locals. So in the hotel world, it doesn't mean that it's about the people sleeping just upstairs. It's the people sleeping upstairs just because people like us will tell you that you should sleep there when you're in our city. Right?
Indeed. All right, so Mark Ellwood, it's a great pleasure to have you, somebody who actually knows, writes about hotels and hotel bars for a living,
I feel like
just talking about them.
I feel like this is a game of which one of us doesn't belong, and I'm the odd one out. I can drink cocktail. I can drink a mean cocktail. I can't make a mean cocktail. But I spend my life on the road, and I spend my life in hotel bars when I'm on the road. And what I think is so interesting about them and why they are so special is, especially in that sort of craft cocktail moment, which can be quite intimidating, hotel bars are open to everybody. And they are a cross-section. You will see a huge variety of people in a way that you don't necessarily see in a lot of cocktail bars. So I love that. And I think that's what makes them so special. And obviously the gentlemen who work in them.
All right, Simon Ford, I think between the two of us, we've probably got more hotel nights than anybody else, although never worked at hotel bars, either of us, so we're sort of long-time listeners more than...
you know, as Jacob and I, both people that love
this industry and love going to bars, right? And there could be worse jobs. The hotel is one of the most interesting sectors to really look at. You know, you do have everything. You have everything from going to the Savoy, where, I don't know if you've seen this man in action, but he will roll a Bloody Mary like this, and he's wearing a white jacket, right? And there's not one bit of tomato juice on that jacket, right? And I'm like, where do you get skills like that? Because I have tried for 15 years. I can't even look at my Bloody Mary.
You have to wear a white jacket, so once you wear a white jacket, I don't want to mess it up.
Well, because the rule for me is traveling is I only ever wear black because of the invention of the Cosmopolitan. Right? Until the, you know, like it was like white pants and the Cosmopolitan just didn't go after the fourth one. You know, it's like you would see me like with these like pink patches on all of my white clothing. So, but it's a broad spectrum. So you have hotel bars like the Savoy that are classic, you know, like the Ritz, and you have to put on a jacket. Or you can go the complete opposite spectrum, and you can look at what Josh does. And people go to those hotels because of who is upstairs, not because of who is upstairs. Sorry, they check into the hotel not because of the room, because of the bar downstairs and the nightclub and the music that's going to happen. Then you can travel to Las Vegas. And those guys will throw more money at talent and bars and concepts and restaurants and bringing the Joe Robuchons and try the speakeasy and everything. So the bar seems to be this international world. And the one thing that essentially ties them all together, and part of why I think this is an important talk that Jacob's put on, is what ties them together is your consumer is international. You're not playing to a local audience. You're not playing to a national audience. You're playing to an international audience. And so you need to be able to be culturally aware constantly. And so if you're ever if you're a bartender thinking about where you should learn to bartend, the hotel bar will give you cultural perspective. And I think that's why I love it so much.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, and then I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Jacob Briars. I'm the Global Advocacy Director at Bacardi. I spend probably about 50% of my time on the road. So I'm in hotel bars probably as often as I'm in any other kind of bar. In fact, probably more often. And the impetus for this talk really was my very first trip overseas, sort of as a young bartender. I went to London, and I had a dog-eared copy of, the Lonely Planet Guide to London, and I was sort of making my way just around the city, just walking on foot, trying to see absolutely everything. And I realized that I'd ended up sort of down the bottom of Fleet Street and was making my way along the Strand. And sort of I had enough sort of intuition from having grown up reading lots of English novels that I must be very close to the Savoy. And so I walked in, but I wasn't dressed for the Savoy. So I had a backpack and I had shorts and flip-flops because I'm from New Zealand, and that's pretty much the only thing we wear. And so I walked into the American bar anyway, and this is almost 15 years ago on a Sunday night. And I didn't know it at the time. I only knew the fame of the Savoy and the American bar because of the Savoy cocktail book. But I was lucky enough to be served by Peter Dorelli in his, I think what ended up being his last year working at the American bar. He was Erik's predecessor. And Peter was sort of less famous for his cocktails, I guess. I think his favorite drink by the kind of time he finished was a White Russian. And it just sort of, didn't really matter what you wanted. Oh, I hear you make a famous leap year or a Corpse Reviver #2. Yeah, have a White Russian. But the thing that stuck with me, I wandered in looking like I obviously didn't belong, which I didn't. And on a Sunday night, Peter, that was when Peter had all his regulars, and he would just sort of work the room so effortlessly, making absolutely everybody feel at ease. So there were sort of people who'd walked out of the set of Downton Abbey on one side, and then kind of, bizarre sort of Euro trash in white pants. I didn't actually realize you also like those, Simon. And then I'm sort of stuck in the middle, just trying to make my way through the classic cocktails of the Savoy. And he just managed to make every single person feel exactly at ease, as if they all had the same right to be in the American bar. And that was a very, very unique experience. And for me, my colleague Ian McLaren likes to describe hotel bars as providing effortless hospitality. And that is ultimately what we're all trying to do, whether we run bars, restaurants, clubs, but I think the great hotel bars of the world do it best of all. And I think, that was my first experience in a famous hotel bar, or even a famous bar. And Peter just managed to create this kind of unique experience. So for us, really, the jumping off point for this, for Simon and I discussing it, was how many, there's so many great cocktails which actually have their roots in hotels. And it doesn't really matter which of the golden eras that we're sort of digging back through. But if you go back through, probably 50% of the drinks we still make today, they have their roots in hotel bars. You know, starting off with the Blue Blazer and the Brandy Cruster and the Prince of Wales. Then the sort of golden age of cocktails, so the Algonquin, the Vucare from right here. Corpse Reviver number 2, the Hanky Panky, the Pina Colada, the Singapore Sling, all the way down to kind of the classic revival drinks that kicked off the whole cocktail renaissance in the late 90s. The Pineapple Martini, the Watermelon Martini, the Pineapple and Cardamom Martini. Just basically just mixing vodka and fruit. And it seems laughable now, but in 1995, 1996, nobody knew how to mix vodka and fruit. You know, and then of course the classic drinks of today, you know, drinks like the Made in Cuba, the Green Park, barrel-aged drinks from Clyde Common. You know, so many of the great drinks that have shaped our industry and shaped our traditions come from hotel bars. And you've got one of them right in front of you here.
Yeah, well, an interesting point on that last slide, to be honest, is this idea that if you take a drink like the Singapore Sling and this particular cocktail now, the cocktail makes the hotel the destination in these situations. People go to the Raffles and get a Singapore Sling, and people go to the Savoy and they get a White Lady. So there's this element that, you know, if you think about how clever hotels are at bringing guests in, they're not just thinking about making the lobby nice or the room nice or the amenities or having a spa. They're also thinking about this idea that a cocktail can bring you in to the hotel, and we do it. You know, I've been to the Raffles and I've drunk that drink. I'm sure it's coming up late. Well, I know it's coming up later in the talk, so and it's disgusting.
Right in front of you, we have the best the best approximation of a classic hotel drink that we can do at scale, I think, which is the Duke's Martini, and I know this is a really kind of famous example from London and a favorite of yours.
Yeah, the Duke's Hotel's a personal favorite of mine, and I believe Max Warner's too. But this it's not because I'm an alcoholic, right? And that's funny to the people that know what this drink is, but it's what you would consider to be a naked martini where there is no dilution. They just freeze down the gin and vodka, and they pour it into a martini in a chilled martini glass, neat, and it's just like, you know, when you drink your vodka neat. Well, that's pretty much what they're giving you. They just add a couple of dashes of vermouth, a big twist of lemon in lemon peel, and if you've ever seen The Ritual, they make a whole meal out of cutting the slice of lemon, right? I mean, they've almost made it an art form. You're like, as another bartender, you might go, you're just doing a lemon twist, you know, and because if you see, you know, when you go there, you go, the movement is all in the hip. Yeah, it's because they have Italian bartenders. I know you're from. He's not Italian, by the way. He just looks like Italian because of the.
I'm just using Italian olive oil to feed the crowd.
But so the Duke's Martini, sort of, for me, it was the way I personally discovered the idea of a martini that's served in a trolley, you know, and they would come by, and the whole ritual was done tableside, and that's what they were famous for. And a lot of people went there, and they were doing it for years. And what obviously makes it easier is not, to stir a martini takes 20, 30 seconds. These guys are just like, you know what, we can get more martinis out and get people wasted, which means they'll leave quicker. If we just pour neat in there. And so often people say that they limit you to 2 martinis, but that has never been the case for me. And it just goes to the, when you go back, it just goes back to the sort of final point of what I love about hotel bars, really, is after 4 Duke's Martinis, if my room's upstairs, there is a possibility I can get there. Home's another story.
So this is a really, obviously a really hard drink to kind of replicate in this kind of environment. So at Duke's, it comes in, the cocktail glass has been frozen for weeks on end. The vodka or gin is frozen, the vermouth is chilled, the olives are cold. So everything is designed to give you a great a la minute experience, which is obviously hard to do here, but it's such an iconic idea. Duke's is an unprepossessing hotel. It's sort of unlikely. It looks like a kind of, gentleman's club, which I guess it's modeled on. But it's just one of the great experiences because of the service and the hospitality that they give you. Also, Simon, it's 2 shots of straight gin, right? And so Simon's used up most of his best jokes for the awards today. So we thought if we gave you one of these, and I use the term best, relatively speaking, if we give you 2 shots of straight gin, then everything else in the talk should become a lot funnier. We hope. All right, so very, very quickly, hotel bars are something which is a sort of fascinating evolution, and they're really something which is an American invention. And in particular, they're an invention of 3 cities in the US that kind of created this tradition. New York City, which still probably, has had most of the most famous hotel bars in the country. New Orleans, because it was kind of a city that was open to the world. And St. Louis, which at the time of the kind of evolution of the hotel bar, that was the western border of the United States. There was, of course, for thousands of years, the tavern, which is the forerunner of the hotel bar across Europe. But taverns were very, very kind of hoi polloi. It's where travelers stayed, and you stayed there because you had no other option. The people who had the ability and the money and the wherewithal to drink cocktails and punches and those sorts of things never stayed in taverns. And so in Europe, particularly in the UK, but also France, Italy, Spain, people stayed, if you were from a particular social strata who could afford to drink alcoholic drinks, you stayed in the country houses of the people to whom you were related either extremely closely by marriage in the case of England or more distantly related by marriage in the case of the rest of Europe. And you would call on sort of the famous houses, and that's where you stay. And so that's why punch, became such a particularly British tradition, and it's a sort of drink that you might have at home. But the idea of staying in hotel bars was very, very foreign, right? And without it, if the UK had hotels and hotel bars, there would be no Jane Austen novels, or they would be very, very different, right? Because people weren't calling on each other and staying at each other's houses with all of the sort of frisson of excitement of having young bachelors up from London. It was the United States that needed the hotel bar because all of a sudden you had a vast population expanding at an enormous rate, both in terms of population and in terms of geography. And these were people who weren't related to each other in a way that they could vouch for each other. So you had people, they might have been of your class or of your level of income, or you might be broadly involved with them in one of the political movements of the time, but you weren't related to them enough to invite them to your house. And so in cities like New York, Philadelphia to an extent, New Orleans, and particularly places like St. Louis as the border started to move west, you needed a place where you could conduct your business and where you could relax. And so you stayed in hotels, and you needed a place where you could invite people that you'd never really met before, but you needed to meet, to hotels. And that was kind of really the evolution of the hotel bar and where it began from. And very, very quickly, this became an American invention that people started to comment on and to talk about. This idea that you'd stay in the hotels were becoming increasingly grand to a level that shamed all of the kind of lodging houses of Europe. And in particular, they became very famous for the quality of the drinks that they would serve. And the most famous of those, one that became internationally famous even by the early 1840s, was the City Hotel in New York City. And anybody that was anybody stayed at the City Hotel. Partly because it was right next to Trinity Church, which is kind of the Anglo-Saxon capital, the spiritual and kind of cultural home of New York City, and by extension the USA, but also because of the quality of the juleps of a guy called Erasmus Willard. So if you could afford to stay in New York City, then you tended to try to stay at the City Hotel, where you would, entertain people and invite guests specifically to have the mint juleps of Willard. Now, Willard performed 2 jobs, unusually, and this was very common for probably the first 20 or 30 years of the evolution of the hotel bar. He was the check-in clerk, and he was also the bartender. So as you checked in, he would sort of take your name, give you a key, and while you were standing there sort of settling your bill, he would whip up a mint julep. And that's the reason why most bars in the United States are 42 inches high in old taverns, because that was the height of a check-in desk, which was also the height of the bar. And that's a kind of, there was just a simple model that rolled out to the Irish bars, to the dive bars of New York City, and across the entire country. So you would once, if you've ever had to come in off a long flight or a long trip and endure the check-in experience at most hotels, I'm sure you can agree that it would be a much more pleasurable time if you were also nursing a mint julep. New Orleans, of course, was another place where the social kind of strata, people weren't intermarried in the right way. In fact, New Orleans was considered to be quite a dangerous and disreputable place, largely because it was, and probably still is. And so, but it was also the port by which, there was no Miami at this point. Nobody in their right mind went to Florida. Charleston had sort of been, kind of fallen off the radar in terms of its political kind of clout. So any trade that was coming in from the Caribbean or across from Africa or from Europe was either going into New York City which also was another hotbed of hotel bars, or into New Orleans, and this is a place that continues to have amazing hotel bars throughout history. Probably, obviously, the Sazerac bar is a very famous one. It's not quite where it once was. And then down below on the right, we've got the St. Charles Hotel. That's in its third iteration. Its fourth iteration is the building on the left, which is no longer a hotel bar, obviously. It's a kind of an office building. But there's a nod to its history and its tradition. You can see the shape of a Martini glass on the side of the building, which is sort of left as a little nod. So we know we're in a town here that prizes its history, its cocktail history, and of course the history of its hotel bars. None better example of that than the Carousel Bar, which dates from the 40s right here in the Monteleone with the classic cocktail, the Vieux Carré. All right.
Does anyone own the world record for the most circuits?
Most rotations?
Yeah,
well, certainly Dave Wandrich or Camper English, I think. They sort of conduct their business there.
I got so drunk it stopped.
I mean, to sort of... No, that's because they worried that you may not be able to pay your tab, and they were like, let's not give him any more drinks. I mean, you can see in the Carousel Bar this kind of the early part of this kind of artifice of creating these fake worlds and these fake environments. So the Carousel Bar is almost a forerunner of, you know, the themed bars of Las Vegas of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the whole kind of tropical worlds which were created across the Caribbean in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's kind of a forerunner of all of those. All right, so as with any history, we've got to start with a bunch of old white dudes. Cool. So when we talk, who here works in hotel bars presently? A reasonable number. Cool. Who here has never worked in a hotel bar and thinks they probably never would? And who, okay, put down your hand if you're prohibited by law from working in a hotel bar. All right. A lot of people think that a hotel bar nowadays, you know, we think about chains like the Holiday Inn or the, you know, like mass market chains with a sort of, you know, mixture of drinks that predate, you know, that are kind of catching trends from 10 years ago. But in the 1880s, 90s, you know, in fact, really for the 50-year kind of the first golden age of the cocktail, from 1860s through to Prohibition, the hotel bar was the pinnacle of a place to work. So if you were Harry Johnson or Jerry Thomas or Eddie Volk or any of their peers through the industry, you didn't say to yourself, you know, is there a small neighborhood bistro that sort of serves small plates with a, you know, and has a focus on artisanal mezcal?
Jacob, can I chime in on that for 1 second?
Yeah.
For those of you who just raised your hand last that would never consider it, 2 years ago, if I told you I worked for Marriott, I'd tell you to punch me in the dick. Okay? Small doesn't mean good, and big doesn't mean bad, right? So recognize yourself that if people care about something, huge things started very small. So any person who really thinks that they are going against the man or the big guy, you're missing the point, right? If you're passionate about what you do, you have nothing to worry about, right? Just wanted to hit on that point.
Great.
So I work for Marriott, the largest hotel company in the world. And we're currently building 11 hotels right now around the world with 17 more in the pipeline. And it's Ian Traeger and Marriott together. Let's take the largest capability and let's take Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll and a Mormon and get them together. Yeah.
Someone that spends lots of money.
Yeah. Come see me afterwards, right? But please, in our business, one of the things, especially that a week like this should really represent for all of us, is that small does not mean it's good. Big does not mean it's bad, right? Test it as a quality. That's it. Look, understand what you're judging. Don't just judge it because you see it as something you don't understand. So, yes.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
No, this is perfect because I think it's such a great point. We're going to get into that in a second, which is, you know, why might you, particularly as a young bartender who's probably thinking, you know, where's the speakeasy or where's the, you know, Latin spirits, you know, bar in my region? Where's the place with 12 seats that I can be working? What we're hopefully going to do today is to sort of broaden your horizons beyond, you know, the towns you may live in here in the US and say the demand for great bartenders all over the world is unbelievable. Like, there has never been more demand for great bartenders in almost every country in the world. And a lot of what's driving that is hotel bars. And they're coming, you know, great hotel operators are coming to places like New York City and taking people like Chris Lowder and using them to drive F&B programs in Korea. Right. Sorry to steal your bio.
I'm in.
Yeah. My own bio is pretty weak, so I just sort of, you know, reflected glory. All right. One of the things that, it probably doesn't really need iterating, but, each of these guys, we look at as heroes, right? So Harry Johnson, Jerry Thomas, Eddie Volk, each of them was part of the hotel bar tradition. It's really where they made their names. So on the left-hand side, we have Harry Johnson was the head bartender before Little Jumbo. He ran the program at the Hotel Pabst, right? So a brewery. You guys, who's a hipster here? Who drinks PBR? Right? Once they owned a massive hotel on Columbus Circle, which is probably the least hipstery kind of address in New York City that you could possibly have, and that was driven by Harry Johnson. The Occidental Hotel. Jerry Thomas was a famous man, but the Occidental, in 2 stints in San Francisco, is really where he made his name. And then down here we have the Knickerbocker Hotel in Times Square, which is where Eddie Volk was bartending for years until Prohibition, when he went to the Hotel Nacional and took this kind of amazing American bartending tradition to the Caribbean and sort of created.
And those hotels were about several things. They were about having the best bartenders ever, which is true. They were about having incredible art collections. They were about having great music and the famous jazz players, play. This idea that if you can hook people to come in to your hotel, to listen to music, to drink great drinks, to eat good food, which obviously happened slightly later with this gentleman's hotel, but these were all hooks to come into a hotel, and it started at the very offset. And I just want to reiterate, Jerry Thomas and Harry Johnson are probably the 2 most famous and quoted bartenders ever, and they were hotel bartenders.
So rather sort of around early 1900, I guess a couple of things had started to change, right? Tourism drives massive change around the world, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later. As numbers of, as entirely different demographics you've never been used to serving before suddenly get to a level of wealth that allows them to travel, they bring demand for a certain kind of service that they're used to. And this was certainly the case. So Americans, the American economy had been through a long, extended boom from probably the early 1870s to a small recession in 1890s, but by and large, 30 years of the country just becoming wealthy to a level that nobody had ever seen before, or certainly not for 1,000 years. And those businessmen and their wives and their children got on boats and went to Europe. And they went to a place that, sort of had an incredible history. But perhaps, shall we say, loosely, we could say we're not service-oriented, would be the most polite way you could describe, certainly England. There's a great TV show in the UK called Fawlty Towers, which is, in the UK, is thought to be a comedy, but to most people who've ever stayed in hotels in Britain, looks like a documentary. Certainly for the first sort of, So Americans traveled to the UK in particular, but also to Paris and to Barcelona and to Madrid, and they were used to having people like Jerry Thomas and Harry Johnson making these drinks in these, pewter glassware with crushed ice and studded with all these fresh fruits, and having amazing spirits and having incredible service. And they got to the UK, and most hotels were like Duke's. Small places that were kind of riffs on it was a place where you came in from the country and you just needed a bed and and a breakfast, right? It's the one meal that England does well is breakfast, because that was all if you wanted a real meal, you went out. And so Americans came and said, this is it, right? And they demanded a much, much higher level of not just service, but also amenities. So the Savoy opened, which we should probably get to. I mean, they brought in things like the menu, the 3-course meal, the elevator. There'd never been an elevator.
By the way, as the Englishman here, I just want to defend my country. This is history we're talking about. I'll stop there.
So, I mean, Erik, probably the American bar is, I think, it would be fair to say, the most famous bar on earth.
Yeah,
and possibly a bar that's actually more famous than its hotel. But you know the history of the American bar better than anybody else. I mean, what are the changes that it drove?
Well, I'm still learning the history because I stepped in the shoes, which is 107 years old. So that's something really, really big for me.
You might need some new shoes.
I might need some new shoes as well. Yeah, flip-flops. and I'm so lucky that I worked at the bar where I still have an opportunity to meet my former bartenders who basically grew up there. Like Victor Gover, he started working at the age of 16 and he served Winston Churchill, and he still comes in and he tells me the stories. And those kind of things, it's like it's not, probably happens once in your lifetime, right? And working in the bar, as you mentioned, or the hotel that was first of many, that the reservation sign, that was born at the Savoy Hotel, because they wanted to feel guests special. So the Ritz, who was running the hotel, he just came up with the idea when the guests come in, it's like, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that this person when he walks in, I'm going to make him feel very, very special. And I'll write his name down on a piece of paper, put it on a table, and that's reserved for him. That was born at the Savoy. And this is what we're doing, and we are just soaking into all these stories and just try to carry on and just preserving that. And as you just said earlier on, there's just like, the hotel is the beautiful thing about hotel is just turning these moments into memories for the guests.
But I want to say about this, the Savoy is, and this is almost where I wanted to go, right? The hotel bar, also the hotels in England may have been crappy, yeah, I get it, bash on the Brits, but then Cesar Ritz, you know, and Escoffier open what is essentially the most important hotel in the world from a culinary perspective, from a drinks perspective, from a guest relations perspective. That's what happens at the Savoy. And if you want to think about how advanced they were, the reason it became the place that Winston Churchill sat, you know, the reason Winston Churchill...
Didn't dilute their martinis.
Because the English are good drinkers. The hotel ran its own water systems and its own electricity systems. So the headquarters for World War II were the Savoy Hotel. And I always want to think, because I know that he was a complete bon vivant, that Winston Churchill chose it because he knew he could get good food and good drinks, but there was also this element that you could run your entire operations for a war from the Savoy Hotel because it was this self-sufficient place. So just like perfect. And they were, and it's wartime, so it, you know, as odd as it may seem, in wartime you tend to party a little bit harder because you don't know if a bomb's going to land on your house the next day, right? So every day might be your last. You know, anyone who's ever been to Lebanon will know this. It's like a party is the biggest party city. So the center of partying and the center of operations for all of London became the Savoy Hotel.
It's very true, actually. The day I moved to New York the day before Hurricane Sandy, which was not exactly a World War II sort of catastrophe, but my company had put me up at the Ace Hotel for like 3 days. They were like, you could use this weekend to find an apartment and move there. And then the next day, the whole city sort of shut down. And so I ended up living in the Ace Hotel for 2 weeks. And what was amazing about it is they sort of threw open their doors, and they have these power plugs that nobody knew about outside the hotel. So, you know, they were literally, the Ace Hotel was the last block that had power in Manhattan. And so they were sort of running, you know, this constant, like, come charge your phone, we'll serve you coffee, kind of running this, you know, kind of became a bastion of hospitality for the people who didn't have a lot of amenities.
And Erik will probably correct me on the date, but there's this common story that's told that American bars popped up, and it's reiterating what Jacob's point was. There's this great common story that Prohibition hits, and it's like, okay, we can't make great drinks, and we're bartenders, and so we're going to flee to countries that have civilized drinking laws, and and the bartenders go and bring their skills, right? And of course, the most famous of the Savoy bartenders is Harry Craddock, and that's what he did. But the Savoy, American bar, had been open way before The
current location, where is it today? It's since 1903.
1903, so way before Prohibition, there's an American bar in London, and it wasn't the first American bar. You know, Leo Engel, Brooklyn bartender, went and opened the bar at the Criterion, which is an older London bar. It's still there to this day. It doesn't make great drinks, you know, but you had American bartenders traveling with all of this great, you know, all of these great drinks and spirits and ideas from America way before. I think the very first American bar actually is in the Bank of England. So the most famous is obviously the Savoy, but it wasn't because of Prohibition. It was because of what Jacob said, this idea of better quality and standards.
Demand, right? So people, and I think that's one of the things we're going to get into in a second, is people traveling the world, you know, they didn't travel with Lonely Planets saying, you know, it's going to be so great to experience local traditions. if they had the money to travel the world, they wanted a level of comfort and service that they were used to, for good and bad, right? So probably most famously at the American bar, Ada Coleman, who was you know, a famous bartender in her own right, American guests complained that she was serving them drinks. They weren't used to women serving them their drinks, whereas in Britain, pubs and bars have always had women serving the drinks. And so Ada, I think, did she get relocated to the flower shop or something,
Yes.
I think?
Yeah,
because of American complaints. And so they brought in Harry Craddock and said, hey, you run the show, right? So, you know.
You sexist pigs.
Yeah. All right. So the extension of the American bar then sort of moved on. So you took this kind of classic cocktail bar that people were demanding, and then we got to a point where travel had led them to go beyond just London, Paris, Madrid, and Rome, and around the world, where we get to kind of the first of what we call the tropical bars, which are perhaps the place with the most famous tradition here is probably Cuba. But this, again, was exactly the same thing, right? Americans traveling the world wanted to have cocktails, and in fact, the Cuban hotel bars exploded, obviously, from 1919 to 1933 with Prohibition. And the real beneficiary of that was Havana, or Cuba in general, because people, you know, it was a short flight, either from New York or certainly an even shorter flight
And
from
Bacardi.
Yes, well, Bacardi was the prime beneficiary, right? Because people went down to the Hotel Nacional and all of these other places where they brought in top bartenders. One thing we should point out quickly, Cuba is obviously a hot topic. We've got some Cuban bartenders here this week. There was a great bartending tradition in Cuba already. Right? What's up? Exactly. The tradition of the Cuban bartenders, like if you go back through the old Cantinero books, in fact, the tradition was so great that, you know, drinks like the daiquiri, drinks like, you know, these predate Prohibition. And perhaps even more importantly, Cuban bartenders led to the creation of the dry vermouth that we're used to using today. So that super crisp, dry martini style, such as made by Martini, was actually a demand by the Cuban cantineros, not by bartenders in the United States, who were totally happy to be using the vermouth that they already had. Sweet vermouth was the driver here. Cuban bartenders were increasingly trying to serve crisper, more refreshing drinks, and that actually led to the creation of Martini dry vermouth in 1900 as a kind of response. So they had their own great tradition. We kind of tell ourselves, oh, so obviously Cuban, you know, American bartenders went down to Cuba in 1919 and taught them how to make drinks. That's certainly not the case. But the style of drinks did evolve and become sort of more tropical, more sort of on holiday, I guess, right? Because that's why Americans were going there. They were flying down for the weekend, and they fell in love with drinks like this one, which was the creation of Eddie Volk, Hotel Nacional.
So Eddie Volk is I think the quintessential and ultimate bartender when it comes to being a hotel bartender. The Bellevue, Philadelphia, he went there. And so Prohibition happens. He was at the Knickerbocker Hotel in New York City, the Whalen Hotel in New York City, but then and the Biltmore in Los Angeles, and of course the Biltmore over in Cuba, and of course the Nacional. And he went to the Plaza Atenei, which is still there today. There's a Jean-Georges restaurant there as well, Josh. Ever.
I mean, the tropical era sort of also led, obviously, Miami and the Hotel Coronado in San Diego. Like, Americans got used to this level of kind of resort-style service and started to demand it at home as well. But it really reached its sort of pinnacle in Cuba, I think, as in hotel bars equaling great hotel drinks. And this, obviously, there's a kind of very small number of superstar drinks from Cuba, which are like, you know, the top two or three, you know, top two or three of the best of the top 10 drinks of our time, you know, mojito, daiquiri. But the Hotel Nacional for me sits just below those in terms of it's so incredibly delicious, and it also is one of the first examples, I think, of a drink that makes you feel like you're on holiday. Right? So when you drink a Manhattan or a brandy cruster, or, you know, they're not holiday drinks, they're after work drinks. Whereas you drink this and you're like, you know.
What makes you feel? I think the rum industry, and Jacob can't say this because he won't pimp his own shit, right? But
give me another Hotel Nacional.
No, but what's really interesting about the Cuban rum industry is it's actually one of the youngest rum industries. You know, technically, certainly stylistically, out there. You know, you take the Jamaican rums or the ones from Barbados, you know, with these 500-plus-year-old industries and this pot still and this fun. But here you're creating rums that are light and they're easy to drink and they're dry and they make great mixing spirits, right? There's this idea that, you know, and so all of these cocktails that are coming out of Cuba are essentially inspired by the rum that was being made then.
Screw the cocktail for a second. People's curiosity are piqued when they walk into a hotel, right? Like your taste buds, your what the hell is going to happen in front of me is piqued by that hotel experience, not just the drink, right? So a mojito makes you feel a certain way, but you walk into a place that's stylized and thought out, it evokes an emotion, right? So life is made up of memories, positive and negative ones. We reflect on our lives on positive and negative memories. In a hotel experience, it's about creating a positive memory. I work for a guy named Ian Schrager, right? I started working for him for 14 years ago. He will admittedly say to you that 10 years ago you checked into the Delano, or 15 years ago, he goes, you're lucky if you had a bed in your room. I cared about who was in my hotel lobby bar, right? He didn't talk to you about the cocktail that was being made. He was talking about the environment that he was trying to create in terms of the look, right? What are the two largest private enterprises in the world right now? Anyone know?
Oil and coffee.
Well, excuse me, I should say organizations. Airbnb and Uber, right? Two organizations that don't own a car and don't own a hotel, right? And it's a really big threat to the hotel industry right now is Airbnb. That is wonderful for all of us because now we just can't have to think about our cocktails. We have to think about every moment of our hospitality, right? People now can say, I don't want to stay in a hotel. The advertising campaign for Airbnb is the greatest thing ever. Live like a local. All of us have these demons in our hands that bless our lives and fuck us every day, right? Because I work in a hotel that I have people spend $1,500 a night to stay in a hotel room that will gladly say, I will eat in the most expensive restaurant in town tonight. And then the next day, they're going to say, I want to have a $35 local authentic dining experience. The amount of top 10 lists I get in my email box every day, fuck off, right? Whoever's writing them is sleeping with someone that is number one and doesn't pay attention to everything else as their details.
I've noticed that you've had a lot of top 10 listings.
I've been killing it. I've been killing it. I say I know Simon Ford. But when Jacob just said, I'm sorry to go off track on, now we're on tropical era. When you said a cocktail reminds me of something, remember what it feels like to walk into a hotel. Where am I? What am I doing? Why am I here? Who am I going to meet, right? A hotel evokes an emotion. What is going on here? Ian Schrager made Philippe Stark famous. Maybe he's designed a couple too many hotels by this point. But it's one of those things. Remember, it's the emotion that we're in this business for, right? Your best meal and best drink you've ever had was not because of the quality of the product. It was the quality of your company, right? So every time you thought about your best moments is who you're surrounded by. So the hotel opened up a lot of these doors. I'm sorry I just ranted for a second.
No, it's good.
But
it
yes.
leads us into, I think, so you're
beyond the tropical era. And
we do want to discuss
yeah.
Airbnb because I think it's a bit of a challenge. But for me, a hotel isn't really, and a hotel bar in particular, I stay in a lot of Airbnb places, but I also stay in a lot of hotels. And I think the defining thing that a hotel can do is make you feel like a millionaire for a lot less than that, right? So, which ultimately, so the drinks at Erik's bar, viewed as collections of liquor, fruit, and ice, are horrifyingly expensive. Well, they were until Brexit. And now you can have them. Now you get the pounders in such free fall. You can have them for loose change. But the hotel bar gives the rooms at Savoy I think start at £600 a night. Yeah. Right. And so that's insanely expensive, right? But you can have the same experience going into the American bar. And getting that same hotel experience. And I think that's the future for hotels, is to give this truly unbelievable experience that's kind of priceless, right? So once upon a time we looked at hotels and said, it's a bed and a bathroom and a shower. And if you look at it like that, they seem crazy expensive, right? You had the point about the Schrager hotels. They actually sort of made it like the bed wasn't important at all.
I think what we forget, and it's very easy to assume that this was obvious, but until Ian Schrager invented the boutique hotel, when you paid more, you got a bigger room. So the money was about the size of your room. You got a suite. The boutique hotel said, we will give you a tiny room and charge you an awful lot of money because what, and think about it, but we laugh, but it's true. Boutique hotels are really expensive for what you get in terms of the room, but you get a sexy bar, you get a sexy lobby. And the idea of doing that was a very new idea that everyone has cloned.
I mean, some of the best examples of that, if you've ever been to New York and stayed at, I think one of the first Traeger hotels, the Paramount, or in London, there's one called the St. Martin's Lane Hotel, where actually getting into the room with a bag is a kind of like, you need a degree in mathematics. And if you'd gone down to one of the hotel bars there and met somebody great, it's like, do I or do I not invite them back to my room? It's sort of, the question is like, you know, what drinks do you like? What music do you like? Are you any good at Tetris?
Okay, hold on. Now I have to defend this, okay? So I work for this man you're talking about. Ian Schrager to the hotel industry is Patron to tequila. Okay, it opened up the category of people's curiosity, of understanding a different way of service. And I mean, I literally just said a second ago, you checked the Delano 15, 20 years ago, you're lucky if you had a hotel, a room in your bed, right? But all of us here over the...
Have another Duke's Martini.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you very much.
At the Delano, they were the same size anyway.
So exactly. You could sit on the toilet, take a shower, and sleep at the same time at the Hudson Hotel. I worked there. You literally could do all those things at the same moment. It was amazing.
Hotels in France that have turned that into a business.
But again, I have to go back to the emotion that was evoked in those experiences. Like Mark was saying, people gladly would spend that money to be able to have access to downstairs if they weren't a cool local to get and experience it on their own, right? If you were not a cool local, you had to pay for that room to get into that place, and you gladly did so, right? And you know what? Simon had something to trump me on. But what Ian has done for the business is unparalleled.
We're going to talk a bit about Traeger in a second, but first, I think perhaps more than anything else is the hotel bar got taken to what we would call exotic parts of the world, probably, I guess, 1900 to 1950, right? With the creation of, so in places where space wasn't at a premium. And they kind of put many of these places on the map. So we've got the Royal Hawaiian Hotel on the left, which is this kind of, I don't even, it's, you could fit several golf courses into that hotel. They built this kind of giant pink wedding cake of a place, and it's just one of the most unique, and so the exact thing there is to make you feel like you're in a wonderful tropical location, which you are, but all your cares are being taken care of. Down below, we've got the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, which kind of did the same thing, and then probably the most famous hotel bar in the world that isn't the American bar, which is Raffles, which is, you know, such a, you know, basically kind of, Singapore used to be a bit of a crazy place. It's become very formalized and structured and prosperous now. But once upon a time, it was a crazy trading community with all of these cultures kind of bashing up against each other. And Raffles provided a sort of respite from that. And the people who traveled to Honolulu and to Singapore and to Tokyo, those weren't short trips, particularly in the age of the, you know, steamer ships. So you would stay there for weeks or even months on end. And the hotel bar became the place that you kind of lived and worked. And they were made really famous by this kind of literary class, right? Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's appropriate to talk about here is that at the Four Seasons in Seoul, we have Charles H. Baker, the bar.
Oh, perfect.
So Charles H. Baker Jr., of course, being a gentleman who traveled all around the world on, thank you very much, all around the world on cruise ships. And wrote down these recipes in the same way. And I think it's appropriate here to talk about, because while we are talking about traveling and going to these destination hotels and being transported, 40% of our business at Four Seasons Seoul is people doing staycations. And I know that at the Nomad Hotel, we also had a tremendous proportion of our business that was people from New York that were just wanting to be transported a little. So the Hotel Nacional, actually, this cocktail is our best-selling drink, and I think it's appropriate because people, whether you're having this cocktail or whether you're stepping into one of those locations or stepping into the bar, you just want to feel that space, right? You want to feel taken away from the day-to-day. And anyway, so Charles H. wrote a lot about that, and well, this drink says it for me. So
Cool.
Yeah.
I think like there was a whole raft of people, right? So people like Somerset Maugham, Rudyard Kipling, all of these great writers, Hemingway, obviously, they lived in hotels and wrote their books. They would sort of get up in the morning, they'd have an eye-opener, you know, a corpse reviver or an absinthe cocktail or a Bloody Mary or a Singapore sling, kind of kickstart the day. They'd write for a couple of hours, often in the hotel bar. And the books that they wrote about the writing of the hotel bars made the hotels famous. So even people, you know, if you've never been to Singapore, you know the Singapore sling, and you know that long before you were ever able to drink, because there's so much stuff, you know, nobody writes about Singapore without writing about raffles.
This hotel that we're in right now.
Another great example, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so, you know, these kind of literary hotels, you know, really made, they did a couple of things. They made hotel bars famous, and they made tourism in general sexy. Which we're going to get to in a second. So then we kind of get to the explosion post-World War II of what we call the jet age, with brands like Hilton opening hotels all over the world, probably most famous Caribe Hilton.
I was going to say, I think what I think is interesting about Hilton when it expanded the way it did, I think we've forgotten that Hilton was exporting safe Americanness. What it did, it said, if you come stay at the Hilton, a bit like the Ritz-Carlton does now, where you don't know where you are when you're in the room because they're all identical. But what the Hilton did, much like that American bar sends, it took America overseas, so you were able to go overseas safely and then could explore the city. So it was sort of like a safe space that you could go to and then be in Paris.
And San Juan in particular, you know, if you've ever read the Rum Diaries or kind of any of your history of political kind of tradition, America in the 20th century was forever doing these sort of benign, quote-unquote, interventions in their backyard, where they would sort of take over and occupy places like Cuba and Puerto Rico, and if they could get away with it, they wouldn't give them back. And Puerto Rico is still in that case. And they're sort of, you know, having become part of the Pax Americana, they would say, come down here and experience the tourism. And the Caribe Hilton is probably, I think, the most famous example. If you ever go to Puerto Rico, you must stay there, because it's probably famous for, I think, the quintessential tropical drink, which is the pina colada, which comes from there. Okay, we're going to quickly bang through because I've got lots of questions we want to sort of get through in a second. So we get to the Caribe Hilton in the 50s, and all of a sudden we get to a level of prosperity and wealth, and everyone thinks, hey, let's get on a plane and go stay in some hotels somewhere. And we get to the rise of people like Club Med, who service this kind of mass need for tourism. The problem, of course, by the 60s is that people start to sell all-inclusive prices. So come and stay with us in Mallorca or Jamaica or wherever it is, and all the drinks will be included. And that was super evocative, first of all, right? Who wouldn't want that? But then, of course, F&B managers come in and they start to drive down the prices. So if we've got free drinks, you know, sort of, you know, initially that's great, and, you know, the French come and the Canadians come and they're very polite and they have one drink each day at happy hour. And then the British and the Swedes and the Germans say, hey, package tours, all included, and turn up and drink the place out of business. And so people, F&B managers just drive down the cost, and then inevitably after driving down the cost, they drive down the quality. And so by the 1970s and 80s, you know, the Tom Cruise era of cocktail, you cannot get a good drink in a hotel bar. Of course, you know, basically, you know, they have one thing that I think we forget, though, is that this was an era where, for the first time ever, possibly in the entire history of their families, working class and sort of average people were going and staying in hotels and going into hotel bars and perhaps having a cocktail for the very first time. So even though all the drinks sucked, including the blue ones, you know, you know, the blue Hawaiian, like, you know, the pina colada, you know, the Bahama Mama, all of these drinks, they were the first time, often in the history of somebody's family, that somebody was having a cocktail. So we idolize this age of prohibition, and we think that everybody just walked in and, you know, drank drinks on the sly. It was a very small strata of people that lived in big cities with a certain level of wealth. The package tours, Club Med, kind of brought cocktails to the masses, for good and bad. So by the 1970s, disco and Club Med and the package tour had made the hotel bars so naff. And then in 1975, does that translate? Yeah, naff kind of means it sucks.
It's just a great word anyway. It sounds, it means what it likely sounds. Yep. Naff.
And kind of the final death knell, I think, was in 1975, the Hong Kong Hilton invented the minibar. And so you no longer needed to go to a hotel bar if you were jet lagged. You could just stay in your room and pour, you know, a Bacardi or a Johnny Walker over ice, mix it with something and fall asleep, you know, surrounded by M&Ms. And so I've heard. And so really, like, the hotel bar became so tame, and it became something that sort of parodied, and it's still parodied even, you know, the New York Grill at the Park Hyatt in Tokyo. It's actually a wonderful bar, but it's kind of parodied and lost in translation, as there's nothing more hopeless than sort of sitting out in a hotel bar rather than experiencing the city. And that became the way in which people interacted with hotels. And the nightclubs, disco killed the hotel bar, or the bits that the minibar didn't kill. Which leads us to a great segue, because disco and nightclubs in the 1970s and 80s were an amazing business, and money was flowing through them. And then in the early 1980s, perhaps the operator of the most famous nightclub of all time, Studio 54, forgot to pay his taxes on the vast amount of money that was going through his till.
After less than 3 years.
What's that?
After less than 3 years. That club was only open 3 years under his own.
Wow. It's a recurring theme, actually. We should do a section on sort of nightclub bars, and all we would actually need is a tax attorney to say, it's not that hard. Because there's a great club in Brooklyn called Verboten, which was just closed for the same thing. Anyway, so Ian Schrager had a little problem with the tax lawyers, had to close down Studio 54, and then in 1984 brought the nightclub to the hotel with the opening of Morgan's Hotel Bar. You could probably talk about this more than any of us, from the looks of...
Yeah, very quickly, 1978 to 1981, literally, he went to tax evasion. There's actually stories, you can look it up all online. People literally broke into the building to look for cash and bushels of cash that were hiding in the walls. Someone actually died falling down a ventilation shaft trying to find cash in the walls. So Ian Schrager went to jail with Steve Rubell, his partner, who passed away from AIDS. And when they were in jail, they came out, and New York said, I'm not going to give you a liquor license. You're crazy. So they traded Studio 54 literally for what is Morgan's Hotel on Madison Avenue. And everyone knows that it was Ian Schrager Hotels, and became Morgan's Hotel Group based on the 20th anniversary of the actual Morgan's Hotel. And when Ian actually took the company public, and he stepped away and created Ian Schrager Hotels.
It utterly blew up the model of the hotel, which before then had sort of been, you know, the Hilton Hotel, make it as same as possible as you can everywhere else, sell, you know, to your point, sell ever larger rooms, ever increasing, you know, cost of the club sandwich. And, you know, they were all basically the same all over the world. And then Ian Schrager came along and said, every single hotel is going to look different, and it's going to have a sexy space, and people are going to want to flood there. And perhaps most unusual of all, locals wanted to go there. Right, and Morgan's is just one great example. St. Martin's Lane, I think you were working at, and Purple Bar, is that right, Eric? And then perhaps at the top right, we have one called Met Bar, which is in London at the Metropolitan Hotel, which kind of changed everything for London. The opening of the Met Bar, together with the opening of the Atlantic, made cocktails cool in London in the 1990s. The cocktails weren't necessarily good. On the top right, you can see a particularly emo sort of Ben Reed making his signature pineapple martini, which basically is exactly how it sounded. You put some vodka with a dash of sugar syrup, and you muddled some pineapple, and that was the pineapple martini. And so it wasn't really mixology driven, but it was revolutionary at the time, and I think it taught us all how to bartend again. There were some classic hotel bartenders, Salvatore Calabrese on the top left, Peter Dorelli from the American Bar bottom, and then of course a very young Jack McGarry, currently probably famous for the Dead Rabbit, but there he is bringing a sort of, you know, also emo intensity to the hotel bar world. There were two kind of unifying things to the craze of, you know, the modern British or, you know, European hotel bar. typically people who had never seen the sun, and they had a bizarre fascination with syrups made by people like Monin and Massenaise. You know, you sort of go into them and every drink had a sort of fruit syrup. Okay, so the late 90s, these hotel bars started to sort of teach us that hotel bars can be cool again, and we start to get people opening great hotel bars again. So rather than just sort of nightclub style things that serve drinks, we get really, truly amazing experiences. And perhaps one of the best examples is a place with no tradition of sort of, you know, luxury hospitality. In fact, if you had said a couple of years before this opened that Belfast in Northern Ireland was going to become a tourist destination, people would either laughed or more likely cried. Because, you know, this is pre-Titanic tourism and pre-Game of Thrones, right? And then the Merchant Hotel opened, led by a guy called Sean Muldoon, who's here in the room to make sure I say the right things about the Merchant Hotel. And I think what it did is it really kind of showed people that hotel bars, there was a new level to be reaching for. They became very, very famous for a 750-pound Mai Tai using an original ingredient, so using old school 17-year-old Ray and nephew. Again, 750 pounds once upon a time was a lot of money. Now it's less than a club sandwich at the Hilton in New York. So the Merchant opened, and it kind of became an anchor, and it really, I think, lifted people's eyes for what you could do in a town that didn't necessarily have a tradition. It won almost every award that it was possible to win, and it kind of kicked off this wave of revival and reinvestment in classic hotels. And two of the greatest on earth, you know, kind of kicked off at this next period just after the Merchant. So 2008, the Connaught, which was one of the grand old hotel bars of the world. If you've ever been there, and they started with this all-star panel. So Ago Peroni, who's still the head bartender there, was recruited, and so was Erik. And maybe talk us a little bit about your drink philosophy, because it was kind of every single drink was different. We'd never seen anything like it before.
Yeah, absolutely. Like next door we had Helen Darroze, Michelin star chef, and it's like, right, she set up the standard for the guests so high with her cuisine. So it's like we can't go behind. We just can't provide average bar service there in such a stunning hotel bar where you can see that basically on that picture actually you can still see the carpets. And we designed a bar trolley there for the martinis, and what happened one day, we had David Collins at the bar, and he was so proud of it, and I was telling him, David, I've got a little problem with this, that I can't pull this trolley on that carpet. It's like, right, no problem. Day after, bar was closed, cut the carpet off, and put a marble there. So we got a catwalk for the trolley, right? And this bar was really, really just like setting up a new standards of bringing a modern bartender to the hotel bar. Because before that, I was always looking into the bar, on the hotel bar, like old grandpies. They are just like waiting for the pension, and that's it, game over. And today, for us, was a big challenge, myself and Agostino, that come to the hotel bar. We maybe wanna retire there, but no. For us, was just like completely new challenge and bringing the most exclusive bar experience to the bar for the guests.
I think that was an interesting point, because at that point in London, you know, the head bartenders at hotel bars were people like Salvatore Calabrese, Peter Dorelli. They'd paid their dues, and they'd sort of worked their way up to these positions, which they were never going to leave. And then all of a sudden, the Connaught opened, and they recruited probably the two hot young talents in London at the time. We're like, hey, we're going to open with the youngest, best bartenders in the city instead of the oldest, most senior bartenders. It was quite a revolutionary approach.
And then we were just calling Ford modeling agencies, and we were literally just asking for the hottest men and women you can provide in casting calls, and going to a bar and asking for a Negroni and getting a Peroni instead. So.
And I think the Savoy, so the Connaught really, I think I remember the first time I walked in, and I had the same feeling at both of these places actually, but the Connaught, like, it was such a beautiful space. The proportions in that room are truly unbelievable. Like the attention to detail of David Collins, the designer, was like nothing else he'd ever seen. The Artesian at the Langham opened around the same time, and sort of, you know, you'd walk in and you'd walk up these stairs and you'd see this, you know, hundreds of pounds of like flowers standing in the center, and there was just this level people. So once upon a time, the main job of a hotel bar had been to kind of just keep the F&B oil, wheels turning while you tried to fill these rooms. And all of a sudden, kind of almost cumulatively, a decision was made all over the world that actually a hotel bar could bring people back. They saw what Ian Schrager and hotels like his had done, and people started to go back to the grand old hotels and renovate them. And eventually in 2010, the grandest one of all got renovated, which is the Savoy. And various numbers got thrown around about how much this cost to renovate. And I don't know if you know the actual answer.
The bar itself didn't cost a lot because they just wanted to keep it as it was because it was so profitable and they just didn't touch it at all. So I was stirring my first days of martinis in a wet socks because was everything flooded under the bar. But I was smiling at everyone because that was 200 million pounds spent on the rooms. So I was happy on that.
They kept, I think what they did is they kept this kind of amazing kind of drama when you walk into the Savoy. You get this kind of, you walk down, they have their own road, which is the only road in the UK where you drive on the right-hand side. It's its own sort of self-contained universe.
And so there's twice as many accidents on it. Yeah.
Of course, Mr. Ford, when you're having so many martinis, you're a bit confused.
Simon used to go there after they kicked him out of Duke's. And I remember the first time I walked into the new Savoy. The old Savoy was, charming, but it sort of been allowed to run down a little bit. And you got this kind of same shock that I guess, people who are into art would get if they walk into the Sistine Chapel. Like it was like, I'm at somewhere that's, obviously the history is very important, but the attention to detail was so extraordinary. Absolutely incredible attention. Cool. You had a point? Or?
Yeah, just like when you said attention to details and that's flourishing moments. And one of them, which was probably the biggest memory I had, that's when the Queen's was celebrating a jubilee. So the Savoy management asked me to create a cocktail for her, which I've done, which quite easy. And then they came up with the idea of like, hey, can you come up with a vessel? How are you going to serve that? It's like, yes, of course, give me a couple of weeks. So when I thought about that, I called the beverage manager and the hotel manager and just like, come to see me. I've got the idea how we can serve this. So they come to see at the bar. It's like, no, please meet me at the lobby. It's like, why you want to meet me at the lobby? So like, you want to show me how you're going to serve this cocktail? It's like, yes, of course. So please come and follow me. So I'm taking them outside from the hotel and I'm telling them, so for me, the Diamond Jubilee is once in a life, every 50 years. So probably the next Diamond Jubilee, I want to be in here. So I want to make sure that the serve is still remembered. It's like, okay, can you show us how we're going to serve this? It's like, yes. Do you see that fountain in front of the hotel? Yes, that's my vessel. Are you crazy? It's like, no. That's what the one I use as a vessel and fill it up. And we managed to fill up with 300.
The Queen drunk it all.
Yeah. With Simon.
And that's why she's lived to 90.
Yeah, but how many people in here work in a hotel? Okay, so in a hotel, one of the things that we really try to evoke is that you just don't care about anything, right? Like you actually can have whatever you want, whenever you want. How many of you work in a place that somebody said, who designed this place? I want to know because I want this in my own home. Feels great, right? Like that you walk into a place, like I check myself every day when I walk into my hotel and say, I'm privileged to work here, right? Like from an aesthetic standpoint and the renovation standpoint, like, God, you go to a hotel to not care about anything, right? Just your moment. So like from the aesthetic and for 170 years to just say, you know what, we're just gonna make it better and his feet are still flooding underneath the bar because they're not actually paying attention to, what he should have told him to do, but 200 million pounds in the room. The aesthetic that you feel when you walk into a hotel, it's so damn important, right? People literally want to import this into their lives because it's stressless. Like that's what you're trying to evoke in the hotel bar experience.
I couldn't wait to have a cocktail fountain installed at my house after I
Provided by Simon.
Just tell me what's your budget. Tell me what your budget is. We make it happen, right?
All right. So from there, people realize, I think places like the Artesian and the American Bar and the Connaught and the Delano showed that all of a sudden, hotels are freed from constraints that perhaps normal bars don't have. So they don't, they make their money by filling the rooms. And the F&B spend in the bar used to be kind of an addendum, right? And then all of a sudden, people realized that hotel bars were a great way to get people to want to stay there rather than somewhere else. And so we saw this wave of insane investment in hotel bars. the Ritz-Carlton in Hong Kong, which I think is still, used to be the highest bar in the world. Absolutely phenomenal kind of view, every great spirit that you want. The Gilbert Scott at the in the St. Pancras station, which kind of brings back the kind of faded, 19th century era of glamour. The addition of Miami, the Florida Room, which I think was probably one of the most life-changing bars, because it showed that you could actually get a drink in a hotel in Miami and it didn't need to suck, right? And I mean, what was the sort of constraints there, right? Because once upon a time, all drinks at Miami hotels were terrible.
So the bottom right photo right there is it's the Florida Room, which I opened at the Delano. It was kind of this like wave of holy shit, new hotels are opening in Miami, and the Delano has to have something new. And the W is about to open, and Lenny Kravitz, we partnered with him to design the basement of, which was Barton G Gym at the Delano, right? So we took a gym space and we turned it into a bar, and I'm not giving...
Which should happen to every...
At this moment, you could open a mahjong room or a ping pong hall in the basement of the Delano, and it would have been successful at that point, right? Sure. So we said we're actually going to do a beverage program, the first assertive one in Miami, with live music every single night, and then be a place where, listen, there are 3 cities in America that people go to intentionally get fucked up. What are they? New Orleans, Miami, and Las Vegas, right? When the plane is descending, you say to yourself, I'm going to make bad decisions the next 3 days, right? You say that to yourself. And Miami is one of those, but all those 3 cities have 2 faces. The ones, all places are defined by tourists. They're not defined by locals. I live in Miami. If you think I'm just wearing 6-inch heels and do cocaine and see the sunrise every day, you're wrong. Like, I live there, and it's a great place, right? So the Florida Room was a way for us to declare to the rest of the world, hey, we actually care about what we do here. We're not just a place for you to come party. We're not just a place for you to come let your hair down. We want you to do that, but we can also offer you a quality product. So that was a turning moment for the Miami market, which everyone I know that I sit along with here, and many people in this room, actually really enjoy going to Miami, not just for the sunshine anymore. They can actually go have a great experience. So that was a great moment for us that we were able to use Ian and Delano to get there.
All right, so this is kind of just going to quickly jump on to the drink here, which is sort of this idea that being freed from a traditional P&L, hotel bars are allowed to make drinks that are, just push the boundaries. And this was the Artesian's Pina Colada, which I think is probably one of, the Artesian was a bar which has been extremely talked about. Unlike the American bar, they don't have classic cocktails or the weight of history of having to make drinks in a particular classic style. So they were able to make a drink that sort of, just, they took the idea of a frozen drink, right, which had been kind of the running joke of, the hotel bars all over the world. Frozen drinks, tropical drinks, drinks that were oversweet, and sort of tried to take it apart. And all of a sudden you had these people walking around this 150-year-old hotel with their pina coladas, and then they went from that to a frozen Negroni to go. So there became this kind of sense of confidence that no longer you had to be weighed down by your history, but actually you could start to push the boundaries of what a hotel bar was able to do. All right, we're going to get into, you were talking about GoldenEye. This is just my version of a show-off hotel bar slide. This is the Fasano on LeBlanc Beach in Rio, the Fasano is the archetypal kind of example of a sexy hotel bar serving great products to great people. They're not pushing the boundaries with mixology or actually with their products, because one of the constraints of a hotel bar is if I'm traveling all over the world, I want to drink broadly the things that I drink wherever I am in the world. So I want to drink Bacardi or Johnny Walker or, these known brands. So you don't get the ability to say, here's our artisanal kind of, rye whiskey program. You can have some of those, but you also have to serve people kind of what they want, which we're going to sort of get into in a second. Another big trend, I think, is, representing location. Clyde Common, I actually think, has probably been the most influential hotel bar in the US over the last decade. And yet it looks like none of the other pictures. And the Ace Hotel in general, this is the Ace in Los Angeles, kind of has got this standard of going to the most, whenever a place sort of on the real estate spectrum goes from like sort of dangerous and life-threatening to just urban raw, the Ace Hotel will be there, right? Whenever a neighborhood is first described as up and coming, they'll take a lease and move in with a restaurant and a hotel bar. And I think they're really kind of driving that. And then the next one, I think, the Nomad, which I think you should probably talk about, for kind of setting standards for a city.
Absolutely. I mean, the Nomad Hotel is one that really, it takes not just cocktails, but you've got beer, wine, coffee. The sister restaurant is 11 Madison Park, which is the third best restaurant in the world. So you've got this, they're setting the bar so high in all areas. Yeah, I'll take two. That's it. I still have a pina colada hand if there's an extra one. So there, really you've got this incredible food and beverage, and so the cocktail program just has to follow suit. But also you have an events team. There's weddings on the roof. If you've ever been to an event on the rooftop, it's outstanding. And also, you know, it's a kind of a unicorn because it's a hotel that's very much run like one big restaurant. It's all one brand. There's nothing that's co-branded into another F&B space or anything. So when you go to a wedding on the roof of the Nomad, you're not getting cater waiters. It's not some gin and tonic that's phoned in. It's the same quality of beverage, the same quality of food. There's the chef right there. Hey. But that, for me, I think it's become such an iconic space in New York because the quality and consistency is always there, but it's also transportative, right? The parties, the Halloween party is now known as the place to be on Halloween in New York. And it's that way because it's consistent. People work super hard. You can take one of the two.
No, I don't know which one. the Nomad for me.
Simon Ford has 36 chambers.
No, but the Nomad for me is what has brought this. What is brilliant about London, and London dominates, I think, when it comes to the best hotel bars in the world. But the Nomad brought that to New York, and that's why setting that trend is so important for the US, because I think you're going to see so many great new bars. You know, like it's sort of done it, and it's because it's in New York as well as being brilliant. You know what I mean? I think
Sure.
that, you know, the Sable. I suggest it, but the Sable has this thing. You go there in Chicago, and it's got 1,000 bottles on the back bar. You know, it's got you know, like you just see it and conceptual cocktails.
See, like that kind of distinction, so travel all over the world now. So people are starting to say, well, I've now been to New York and London. I want the same kind of standard of kind of craziness, boundary pushing. Once upon a time in places like, you know, Perth or Sydney or Singapore, you just sort of made, you know, high standard of service with a porter that would carry your bags in amazing linens. And now people are saying, no, I want the same standard of great hotels that I'm getting in New York when I travel. You've got this kind of jet set business class who are asking for this exactly the same standard. Manhattan Bar in Singapore, I know, Eric, this is one of your favorites.
Yeah, definitely. That's where, as soon as I walk into the bar, I clearly see that when they say they spend £2 million or dollars on the bar, it's like, yeah, I can see it here. And that's really brings amazing. Just to walk in.
It's not actually the entirety of the hotel bar, by the way. It's just their barrel aging room where they've got, you know, hundreds of barrels of cocktails barrel aging to certain different levels of time. So in a hotel bar, you could take a longer view, right? You could never do, not even Jeffrey Morgenthaler could do this, you know, in a normal kind of constrained environment. But in a hotel bar, particularly a 5-star one, you can do whatever you like.
I think Manhattan Bar is a really interesting bar too, because you're taking the Regent Singapore, which is an older hotel, and then you're taking the Regent Singapore, which is an older hotel, and then you are adding in the Manhattan Bar, which is I think them at that hotel, and there they are back there. You can wave if you want. They're doing a phenomenal job there, but it's also is a wonderful kind of crown jewel for that hotel. And when you look at a hotel that maybe doesn't have any Michelin stars, or maybe doesn't have these other things that would attract other banqueting business yet, that would attract other banqueting business or big parties who are coming to do big room blocks for the hotel, suddenly they can see this bar, which has then inspired Four Seasons as a company to open bars like this one. And so this is Charles H. That is our bar at Four Seasons Seoul. There's 12 beverage programs in the hotel, 2 cocktail bars, 4 restaurants, a lobby bar, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just one of the bars that Four Seasons as a company is opening across Asia. It's really an exciting time to be in hotel bars because hotel groups are seeing this now as a legitimate area where they can put investment, get some prestige for their hotel, get some international headlines, but also obviously satisfy this growing demand from globally touring hotel guests. I mean, you look at big sources of revenue for a hotel, it's going to come from big room blocks. Maybe it's a pharmaceutical company that takes 100 rooms to do a big conference. And when they're shopping different hotels, one thing that they're looking at now is the hotel bar and the bar program in general. And for these guys, it might be 6 of one, half dozen of the other, staying at the Marriott or the Hilton or wherever. But maybe the guy making that decision loves cocktails. So this is us in Seoul. We're also building, gosh, I think 9 more hotels across Asia Pacific, partnered with Proof & Company, who's an amazing group that's based in Singapore, who does cocktail bar concepts. And they help put together some of the collateral. They help put together some of the messaging. We work really closely on a lot of programs like that. So it's just an exciting time. And you look at the details, you look at all of this. This is actually Avrico who did the space, same people that did Saxon and Parole, who are phenomenal designers.
Charles H is one of the most unbelievable bars. In fact, I was lucky enough to be in Seoul a couple of months ago and realized by mistake, by trying to book the cheapest flight, I'd booked a flight in and a flight out as a layover at 2 different airports. There's 2 different airports in Seoul. And I realized I had a 4-hour layover, so I said to the women at the hotel desk, the airport check-in desk, do I have time to go into the center of the city? And they said, well, not really. You'll probably have about 30 minutes. I was like, that's good enough for me. So I jumped on Korean subway, which is one of many life mistakes I've made. And sort of had about 25 minutes there where Chris sort of met me with a coffee, raced me around the hotel, knocked out a Hotel Nacional, showed me his amazing menu, and then sort of scurried me up and was like, here's your car waiting, which zoomed me off to the next airport in time to get my flight. And it was a great trip to Korea. All right, so Mark, where is the hotel bar going next? You want to talk about places like...
Cool. I think one of the things that I've written about, and I think as bartenders you should be aware, is the idea of bed and beverage. When we look at what the Walker Inn is doing in LA, where they have a bar in a hotel and they're going to operate 10 rooms as a hotel within a hotel, and the way that ECC owns Grand Pigalle in Paris, and even probably the Broken Shaker and the Freehand, where the Broken Shaker really drives that hotel, I expect a lot of you guys and a lot of people who operate bars to not just open more bars, but to look to add rooms, which is weirdly going back to where it all started.
Exactly, right? So we've got the kind of, Broken Shaker I think has been an amazing model because they took a top, so normally you get, somebody, old school F&B operator, maybe tries to find somebody like Erik Lorincz or Aga Peroni to head up the plan or the program, or maybe they find an interesting consultant like Proof. But Broken Shaker, I think, for me, shows a new model, not only because it's going into like a Flash Packers at the Freehand, but also because it's bringing in, the bartenders from start to finish. Gabe and Elad helped design, so many components of this space. So we've got bartenders kind of owning bars within hotels now, and the next logical extension is Le Grand Pigalle in Paris, which is actually bartenders opening hotels. Bringing that level of service and kind of hospitality that a bar has, and actually opening and building their own hotels around that. That's a fascinating model. Okay, I think we've got like 30 seconds, so unfortunately. So, guys, do you have any sort of, why should people work at a hotel bar, or why shouldn't they, and where do you think things are going? A quick opinion from you all.
Benefits?
That's true. That's one of the most amazing things. So when I first came to the US, people would say, let's work in a hotel. Oh, these hotel bars, fuck, what a nightmare. They're full of unionized staff. I come from a working class Labour voting family in New Zealand where it was like unions. There's unions in hotels. It's a good thing, right? Overtime, healthcare, benefits, and in America we've turned it into a dirty word, as if and it was just very, very bizarre because, ultimately as you progress in your career, you might actually want to be able to work 45 hours a week instead of 80, or have health care for your children once you say that you have them, admit that you have them. Cool. Chris, you just went to a hotel bar program on the other side of the world. What was the attraction?
I mean, the attraction for me, well, to Asia, I used to translate, so I speak some languages out there, so it's very convenient. But honestly, when you take that step into hotel bartending and hotel bar management, you're very much forced by the structure of the hotel, by a lot of realities of hotel logistics and managerial structures to kind of grow up a lot, frankly. You have to take on a lot more responsibility. It's a 24-hour operation. You're going to be planning weddings. You're going to be doing banquets and functions. Menu planning suddenly has to be done 6 months to a year out. You've got to be talking to purveyors. Suddenly you've got this scale and scope. I mean, through Four Seasons, they just did a cool article about the new products that we're able to bring into Korea for the first time ever. So we can actually genuinely change the market in a very real way, change the way that people drink, and create a new culture. So you get, thank you, you get that ability to, we're gonna sit like this. You get that ability to have the scale and scope, and you're forced into the scale and scope, and that will change who you are as a professional. And I think that's important, and it's worth thinking about.
It's a good reminder, actually, because when you go to some of these smaller markets, you don't get what you're used to having in New York or London. I remember Chris sent me an email a couple of months ago saying, hey, I want to get some Bacardi 8. And I was like, oh, are you out of stock? And he's like, no, I'd like it to be brought into Korea for the first time. And it was like, and this is a city of 15 million people, right? And a large, prosperous, country. And so sometimes the stuff you take for granted, you may not be able to have.
Tonic water legalized last week,
yeah.
by the way. Yeah. Can I get an amen?
That's so backwards. We've got marijuana legalized. But I just want to say, for me, just to answer the question, is because I want his job and I want his job, right? And his job, they get flown around the damn world, right? And it's someone else paying for it. And I get a call from Josh. We've got to go and do some research in Barcelona, and then we're doing some research in Thailand. What for? Our new concepts, And there's, or you get to go if you're working in New York to now go and run a bar in Korea. Now, how cool are those options? A hotel company can bring you around the world because that's what they do. They are global and they're creating global perspective, and their businesses are global. So to be a part of that is great, Like my aspiration and dream was to get to manage the bar that was just on the right side of town as opposed to the wrong side of town. And so here you can be working in Korea or wherever you might want to go.
I can totally confirm that, so those benefits, because when I started coming to New Orleans, I had to take my holidays, and today I'm here on work trip. So, thank you, Savoy.
How many of you in here have met a bartender you said, do you remember your job is about being hospitable? So one of my favorite things about working in the hotel business is that it's not just about the bars, right? It's about everything involved with being in a hotel. It's about the actual true hospitality of it all. The bar is not our priority. Our guest is the priority. And all the things that we can give them during their experience is going to add to that. So working in a hotel is about creating an experience, right? So for us, awesome if we can give you great food. Awesome if we can give you great drinks, right? Awesome if we can give you a great pillow thread that you love, right? But the whole thing is that if we can give you an amazing experience as a whole, that's something that's very important for all of us, because we just don't think about cocktails. There's more than cocktails. Those are awesome. But for us, the hotel world is, just like Mark was saying, it's wedding BEO is 6 months out, right? Like, there's so many things, but if we can make our guests happy, that's why I think that hotel bars will constantly drive the business, because it reminds bartenders, you're not just here to serve drinks. You're here to make memories.
And the only thing I would say is that I think it's interesting that the minibar, sorry, I have quite a loud voice, the minibar, which threatened the hotel bar, is now probably being revived by the cocktail bars. Hilton has a corporate program where a lot of cocktails, pre-mixed cocktails, are in its minibars. There's the Renwick in New York, the Mondrian. So weirdly, the mini, yes, the Zeta, totally. The minibar, which was the threat to the cocktail bar, is now being saved by the cocktail bars in those hotels.
So
the minibar is like a time machine. It lets you know what the price of beer is going to be in 2020.
we sort of described, you know, what's great about hotel bars is sort of effortless hospitality. We're getting a look from the monitors here, which is the opposite of hospitality. So I just want to say a couple of thank yous. First to all of the guys here, our caps, who made such amazing drinks for all of you. They truly are the superstars. Three very, very difficult drinks to replicate, you know, the way in which hotel bars are able to do it. Thank you to our sponsors, Bacardi and Ford's Gin. And thank you to every single one of our panelists. It's a real pleasure to be on stage with you guys. Thank you so much for coming along. If you've got any questions, come up and see us afterwards. But thank you all for making time on a Saturday to come and see us. Thank you.
All right.